Perfect. So welcome everyone. Very excited to have Patrick Harr here, the CEO of SlashNext. Today we're going to be talking about multi-channel phishing threats, the biggest risk to the modern workforce. And while we're going to be talking a lot about messaging and communication today, the high-level lesson from this session really applies across all security domains, whether that's endpoint security, security operations, identity, whatever. So, in addition to filling gaps in our security programs in the organizations that we represent, we got to make sure that we're not resting on our laurels with regards to problems that we think we've already got a good handle on. And the reason is because the nature of the problem is changing constantly. The attack surfaces are changing, the threat landscape and the adversaries are changing, and this may reduce the efficacy of the solutions we have, or it may completely invalidate those solutions. So, in addition to tackling the new problems our organizations are facing, it's also our responsibility as security professionals to regularly reassess the problems we think we've got solved already. Regularly reevaluating and questioning the solutions in place today is a vital skill in order to effectively adapt to the ever-changing environment we find ourselves in. And adaptability is vital in our field and a lot of other fields. When we talk about the pace of change in the world today and the rate of change, there's almost an implied thought that one day the rate of change or the pace of change will slow down and we'll get back to a quote unquote normal state where we can all catch our breath, right? I don't think so. I don't think that's the way it's going to play out. My prediction is that the pace of change we're experiencing today will be the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience again in our careers. The world's only going to get more dynamic, not less. So adaptability is key to success going forward in the security industry. And part of adaptability is regularly reevaluating your past decisions. So with that, Patrick, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, great to be here, Richard, and thanks for the invitation. Great to see everyone. Yeah, I think as Richard outlined, in many respects, I think the new normal is the abnormal, and it really is about, as you were highlighting, adaptability. And with that, really the purpose of this discussion is going to center really around the adaptability of the human. And if you really think about your daily life, it has fundamentally changed, certainly as we've gone remote or hybrid or kind of work from everywhere. And the bad actors have certainly recognized that. I think they've also recognized where the current target threats come from and where they are actually targeting that user. And again, the purpose of today's discussion is to really be pretty lively and talk about where we are seeing those threats and how they're really fundamentally changing how they're reaching users or compromising users to ultimately get downstream to ransomware, to do financial fraud or do other data theft. But it really does start with that human. And with that this is probably a little bit of a refresh for many of you in the audience. Gartner continually looks at where the successful breaches start. And in many respects, as they continue to report, and we also see this in the Verizon study, about 95% of all successful external attacks begin with the human element, that human attacks, social engineering, phishing. And the reason for that is we as humans are all infallible, right? We're busy, particularly as we've gone remote, we're now very distracted. And with that, I think the fundamental definition, as Richard, you were just highlighting, of how we work and how we interact with our daily applications is fundamentally changed, and it will continue to change at that very accelerated pace. Richard, you were going to comment a little bit about some of the things that you have seen, and they can certainly dovetail on what we are seeing in, quote, this modern workforce and that evolution.
Absolutely. So I'm probably dating myself a little bit, but I know I'm not alone here. When I first started in IT security, communications happened via email and phone calls, and maybe over faxes, right? But that was about it. Fast forward to today, and I don't know about everyone else, but I'm getting hit up on email, on Teams, on Slack, on SMS, on Signal, LinkedIn, Facebook, so many different platforms, right? So back when I started anyways, organizations focused on solving communication security by securing the email channel, because that was the nature of the problem at the time, email and phone calls, right? But this goes back to kind of the overall lesson of this session, which is since we had email security solutions in place, we thought we had the problem addressed, if not solved. But slowly over the years, the nature of the problem has changed. And these changes have altered the problem statement in such a way that we need to re-examine the issue and our approach to solving or securing those communications. So in this case, expanding the scope of communications protections in recognition of how modern communication has changed significantly over the years.
Yeah, in many respects, it's, I think, Richard, to build off of that, from a security point of view, I think it was, we effectively had inside the perimeter, outside the perimeter. And we've all talked about, in many respects, the user is that new perimeter, and that user is everywhere. And you then compound that with the number of interactions that the user has with a multitude of SaaS applications, particularly on the collaboration messaging side. And then you factor in, as I mentioned at the outset, everyone went remote working over the past year and a half, 2 years. And that also introduced the other side of the communication. Effectively, if you want to look at the challenge or opportunity, certainly from a hacker perspective, looked as an opportunity. And what I mean by that is you not only have the business apps that the users are interacting with, and it was very easy, again, as we noted, to secure email before. The users are using these new business apps, but they're also now, because they're working from home, on the same device at the same time, using all these personal communications. And whether that be LinkedIn, Signal, Telegram, etc., we have now seen a fundamental shift of how the bad actors are attacking these users, recognizing A, they can be distracted, B, they're coming from a multitude of different communication channels. So again, it's not just an email kind of attack pattern or a surface that they're looking at. And again, I can give multiple examples, which I'm going to go through here in a moment. But I'd say a few other things that have fundamentally changed in the bad actor landscape. It used to be you would think about phishing as kind of that bad Russian dialect email. You could read the email, and you look at the bad domain on the top, and you say, "Listen, this is a phish." It's very easy to discern. And in many respects, the security tools were built to kind of trust the domain, and they were also almost a signature-based approach. But the bad actors have, again, significantly morphed. Number one, they morphed in terms of the payloads that they use. So it's not just a account takeover type of scam. There's different techniques through smishing, whaling, targeted spear phishing. But there's a few other things that I think are fundamentally important. And they used to launch, again, from a very bad domain. They're now using legitimate hosted infrastructure. So this means it looks, acts, and smells. In fact, we've done these studies where you can go to GitHub, get a $150 very well-crafted spear phishing kit, and then I can launch that attack through automation on Azure. I can launch it on Google. I can launch it on Adobe, any number of the free services out there that are very trusted to the user. So if you think about that for a moment, if I've now trained a user to look at that domain, that's no longer effective. Second, again, it used to be I would look at only through email, but what about Slack? What about SMS? What about all these other communication vectors? And then you look at the different techniques that they're using kind of embedded inside of this, whether it be an IP inspection blocking, CAPTCHAs that they look to put in front. I mentioned automation. It's not uncommon in the attacks that we see today that it used to be a targeted spear phish or just maybe even a mass phishing campaign could last for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We now see through automation that they can last basically a minute a day, sometimes 2 days, and then they effectively refactor it and then spawn it again. So in many respects, I think from a security tool perspective, you have to ask yourself the question, am I protected across these other channels? And B, have effectively the tools been tuned to make sure that I no longer just trust domains. I like to say, don't trust anything, verify everything. And in many respects, as we saw in the malware space, where we shifted from signature-based approach to more behavioral analysis through the virtual sandbox, we believe that same type of approach has to be done in terms of really looking at what's going on in the evolution from phishing to what we call human hacking. And really, again, fundamentally, what we mean by that is how do you, as I mentioned, it used to be very easy to look at that bad dialect, bad logo, and the bad domain and inside of email and train your users. And it was typically an account takeover. But we're seeing the multitudes of payloads, what we call payloads, that have significantly evolved. So it's not just the account takeover, it's the fraud scam, it's social engineering type of interface to that user. It may be, hey, I want you to call this 800 number to basically say it's from your IT department, SMS, call your 800 department, call your IT department immediately because your account got compromised. It may be a rogue browser extension or rogue software player. Bottom line, the what we call the payloads have morphed. But just as important, the channels of communication, as we've highlighted, have also morphed to where they are attacking you. So bottom line, we never want to be in security and scare folks. I think this is really about how do you problem solve. But I think we are sitting at a time where most folks are really protected in the email side, but again, not protected across all these other channels. And you may ask yourself, why do I care about LinkedIn as an example? Or why do I care about WhatsApp? I actually had a CISO I was talking to that had this issue of they got an impersonation of the CEO. This is a very large company, impersonation of the CEO on WhatsApp, sent out a Teams request to the financial folks because they knew who the financial folks were in the environment. About half of those folks joined this quote Teams call. They had screen scraped a CNBC video of the CEO talking. And as we've all got on Zoom, Teams, et cetera, and they say, hey, we can't hear you. After 2 minutes, they said, listen, I can't get the audio to work. Can you send me this financial information? So again, bottom line, there's multiples of these examples, whether in LinkedIn, WhatsApp, Signal, et cetera, where we're seeing lateral attacks back into the corporate side. So bottom line, I don't think of it ever more important now to really understand what that landscape looks like, where these attacks are coming from, and recognize they're always going to go after the weakest link in your security chain, which are the users. And as we noted, as the users have become more distracted, it's never more dangerous.
That's exactly right, Patrick. And we're definitely not trying to scare people, but at the same time, we do need to educate them. And some of the content that we're educating is in fact scary. I mean, the adversaries are innovating like crazy. They're kind of the tip of the spear. If it wasn't so malicious and so damaging and so hurtful, it would almost be impressive how well they are innovating. They're constantly iterating and prototyping new attacks and probing to see where the soft points in the armor are, right? And so, that's great job security for the security professionals, but in order to be effective, we need to constantly be on our toes and constantly be reevaluating what we think is normal, what we think is safe, what we think is covered, because that's what the adversaries are doing every single day.
Yeah, exactly. In many respects, we also see these multi-stage attacks. So it may start in LinkedIn. They've got the full profile on you that does that crossover into another communication channel, compromises some component or some learning that you have about another individual. That then leads to another targeted specific attack to that particular individual. And so, obviously there's multiple folks out there that track the different number of attacks that they're seeing. As I noted at the outset, Gartner really tracks, hey, what are the successful breaches? They do start with those human elements. Again, whether that's a targeted spear-phish, whether that's a smishing attack, social engineering attack, to get you to partake with some information that leads to something else. And again, we continually follow this. Email is still a very, very important channel to protect. I saw that Abnormal was presenting in another session. Great company. But I think as Gartner's noting, this is not just an email problem anymore. This is a full multi-channel, what we call multi-channel communication problem. And you need to make sure you're looking inside those. How do you protect users inside those different communication channels from the multitude of these different phishing, social engineering type of attacks to them? And again, I'll let you read through these, but I would point out a couple other things. Clearly, Verizon continually does a mass study, not just inside of email, but things that are happening outside of email. We're seeing a significant rise and increase in the threats coming on the mobile front, particularly SMS. SMS text is now the second most trusted communication channel. Even in the healthcare space, Epic uses SMS with the doctors very religiously. So it's, again, very trusted communication source. It's also one of where the users basically these bad actors are now attacking. And as you see now, according to their study, 85% of these attacks take place outside of email. Again, I just ask yourself to think about all the number of communication channels that you use. Do you have that opportunity? Are you protecting those communication channels so your workers can obviously effectively get their jobs done? The final thing I would note here, and that's, why is phishing, why is social engineering important? It is the first stage of the quote, the kill chain, or first stage of the chain that leads to something. And if you do look at all the studies of ransomware, we can pick the Colonial Pipeline and number of the ransomware attacks that happen. They typically start, and as again, the Verizon study, 60% of these things start with that human element, that human interaction that compromises the account, does some form of takeover. In the Pipeline case, a very great study that was done by Microsoft. It was a multi-stage attack, but initially started with that account takeover with a user, led to client VPN access. I'm doing a abridged version of this that then led to the ransomware. Again, very typical. So this is the reason why it's so important to focus on your users, which in many respects, I started my career in identity management long ago in Novell. I'm dating myself here for a moment. Single sign-on. I've done the proxy world. And in many respects, a lot of times we were still very focused on the machines. And then if you think about today, we've evolved from data centers to now cloud, which is nothing more than another data center. But what about those pesky users, right? And again, that is where those bad actors are preying. And this is the reason why one of the other key elements that I highlighted is the number of attacks. We have a very extensive lab at SlashNext where we're constantly tracking the number of attacks that are coming inside these, what we call legitimate hosted infrastructure. And with the popular rise of AWS, with Google, with Azure, n number of services, SaaS-based services, there's always a free element to this. These bad actors are co-opting it, and they're basically embedding themselves inside these services, and they're launching these attacks. And that's why I highlighted, as you see here, over 3 million threats on legitimate infrastructure this past year alone. And it's no longer good enough just to train your users to look at the domain bottom line. It's also no longer good enough to have your tools that fundamentally were built around two key things: domain reputation scoring or trust. And if you think about it, Google has a 10 out of 10. So you're going to let everything through. Second, more of a signature-based approach. So bottom line, this is a ever-evolving space. I think we said at the outset, this is one that's only going to get worse, not better, because you actually spawn so many new applications that the user can interact with. One final point I would make here before we move to the next section is, I'm also asked, well, can I just shut off all these applications in my business? Make sure I can get a very locked down environment. I think everyone's aware of this notion of, quote, the Great Resignation. And I highlight this because it's also very important that if we're not enabling the users to have the right business tools to get their job done, and that, by the way, includes their personal tools, right, working from home, then you're really going to give them that opportunity to move to the next place. I was actually talking to a CISO of a very large retail company. In their stores, they had a phishing attack in personal email that then crossed over to the corporate side. So their first approach was, let's lock everything down. But then they had significant complaints within their kind of the store workers of shutting off that personal access. And many of them threatened to move. I only had that as one example because I think, again, security is always this balance, but recognize that these tools are here to stay. It's only going to continue. So it really is about how you're going to protect the users inside those tools.
Exactly. And the adversaries are always looking for the soft spots in the armor, whether that's, where to host their infrastructure, in Office 365 or AWS or areas that, aren't going to be on block lists, essentially. How to get around security tools, maybe by targeting out-of-band communications and, non-email communications, but also how to get through users' kind of own personal security system, right? Attacking them on a communication medium that they're not expecting to be attacked on, essentially, right? So their guard is kind of down a little bit. So the adversaries are constantly looking for these soft spots in our security posture. And it's up to us to continually reevaluate those, understand where the adversaries are going, where our users are spending time, and making sure that we have appropriate protections in place.
Yeah. And I think to that point, one other comment I'd make here, recognize that the bad actors almost have, if there's startups out there, others that are able to use, right, it's pretty amazing things out of AWS and Azure. And as I was highlighting, they're now embedding their attacks there. They also have automation available to them, GitHub and Kit. They also have AI available to them. And so they're able to spawn, learn, and adapt across these channels. And in many respects, sometimes we get into this AI washing, but I really believe that you fundamentally can only solve this problem by fighting machines with machines or bots with bots. You have to stay ahead of the curve. You have to really look at behavioral analysis. Don't trust anything, verify everything. I highlighted that malware kind of transition. The same thing I think is occurring in here, and really being able to see exactly what the user sees from an AI perspective, and then adapt and learn so you can continually find the quote needle in the haystack and prevent these users from interacting with these threats. And again, just to get into some of these specific threats, I highlighted earlier that the payloads have changed, meaning it used to be email and account compromise, account takeover. No longer the case. And in many respects, again, we are seeing, as this highlighted just from a quick trend perspective, the hackers know what's unprotected. We've talked about this. They have been able to source data like never before on you as a user, as well as your organization. Obviously, there was a big breach of LinkedIn, which obviously further highlighted I'm sure I'd probably win this bet, Richard, if $100 every one of us are on LinkedIn. They can map your full profile, associated with that with the dark web, to build that quote very well formed type of attack surface to you. I also noted that smishing has also increased significantly, because if you think about it on a day-to-day basis, I'm using this text message perhaps even more so than in the email. We really moved to a short Twitter world, and that interaction has become very important on both those areas. In LinkedIn, and we see this a lot. It can become the first stage of the attack, where I try to build some trust with you. That second stage could be, I now understand that you joined a new company. I don't know if any of you have had this, where you then almost immediately, once you announce on LinkedIn, because they have the bots looking what's going on, you then get a text message and said, hey, the CEO needs your phone number, or the CEO needs some information from you. And probably half of you at least have gotten that. And so that's kind of a common type of attack that we are seeing almost as that first stage. Other attacks, and again, I mentioned my friends at a normal, clearly there's these quote supply chain attacks inside of email that have evolved. And this is where I've created a trusted relationship upstream or downstream with you. So I already have trust with you, again, as a supplier or as a vendor. It also may be in your financial transactions. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why I joined this company, and I really started my last company, I had two of my customers send POs to the wrong destination. And it wasn't for our security side, but there were some different things that happened in email. They understood there was a relationship between us, and we're able to co-opt to that trust. So clearly this is an ever evolving space. We're seeing the same thing in the text message side, where you have the almost natural language approach, not even links that are embedded there, where they, again, as I mentioned, and maybe that call this 800 number immediately because your IT department or your account got compromised. A few other things that, again, are also evolving. This is a latest one we saw around us. Basically, this was a support contract scam, vendor compromise inside of Slack. And this was actually the quote, it actually had a link for support. And then if you click on that link, interesting, on this particular one, the link resolved local to the machine. So if you think about that for a moment, these attacks are becoming extremely targeted. And in most of the time, if you click on a link, they resolve externally, right? There's some things you can do to inspect that. but what happens if it resolves local to your machine? So these are kind of HTML attachments or HTML embed, resolve local with the express intent to do that first stage, put ransomware on that, or do some type of data theft. So the only way, again, that we know how to solve that, as I mentioned before, using AI to effectively understand, look at the browser canvas, understand that interaction from a user perspective, and actually apply AI to that particular browser canvas so you can see if it's an attack or not. A few other things I would note here, again, back to the payloads. Has anyone ever gone to the Google Play Store? I actually had to switch from Safari to Chrome. Thanks, Richard, because I couldn't make this work. But I don't know if any of you have ever come back to your machine, or if have kids and you come back to your machine and you all of a sudden see these browser extensions that got fired up. And I only highlight this because it's happened during the COVID period. I came back to my machine. My daughter's Chromebook didn't work, and she started using my machine for work. Sorry, for her school. And she had these browser plugins that were coming in. I said, what the heck's going on here? Lo and behold, he's come to find out that the bad actors are using these browser extensions almost as this lightweight way to co-opt the browser, which is effectively the new OS. And so where's the trust lie there, right? Do you have something that's inspecting that almost at the outset so it doesn't get installed, because again, we are seeing a tremendous number of quote phishing attacks through the browser extension. And these are just some follow-on to that in terms of malicious browser notifications, where they may say, hey, you need to do this, you need to upgrade your browser because of for support reasons. Bottom line, again, the bad actors know where you are, and they know where you're interfacing with, and they've developed new techniques to make sure that I can get you to do something. I mentioned before, and this is a absolute, pretty significant rise in the SMS and 800 number scams. The most dangerous, we've all, I don't know if everyone's got hey, call the IRS immediately because you're getting audited. I'm sure a few of us, I know when I first got that a couple of years ago, everyone gets a little worried about the IRS. There was a mass issue last year with the DMVs in Illinois, in Northeast states, where there was an SMS that went out, said you need to click on this link to update your driver's license information. Significant number of folks fell for that. But perhaps the most dangerous ones that we are seeing, as I mentioned, is call your IT department immediately because your account got compromised. Once you get a user on the phone, all bets are off. And again, I'll date myself here for a moment. David Letterman, Stupid Human Tricks. But if you think about it, and there's some great videos out there, I think even on Jimmy Kimmel and some of the other late night shows, where they were able to get someone to give up their password in about between 30 seconds and a minute and a half. So that's just, again, bottom line, this is really about how do I interact? How do I get that initial interface with that user to get them to give up their account issues, or again, whether that be the passwords, get them to download software, get them to partake in a survey. That is that first stage that then leads to the other attacks that we highlighted, the ransomware attacks, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm sure more than a few folks that are on this call have received one of those panic calls from a relative or something, right, where they got a weird message on their screen and they clicked on the link, or someone's giving them a phone call. So I think this is hitting the mark for sure. I think this is something that a lot of folks here are familiar with. Yep,
absolutely. And just to continue, and not to bore anymore with, obviously, I have multiple examples. This is just a LinkedIn scam that we saw. There was a Bitcoin scam that obviously took down Twitter by the 14-year-old. And it's even happening. You may ask yourself, so why would we highlight something in Discord? And Richard, this was a little bit near and dear to your heart because, again, I mentioned that your personal and your business life are almost one and the same. You're working on that device. You may want to take a break. There's a lot of gamers out there, and the biggest kind of communication vehicle you have in gaming is Discord. So, Richard, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of points out that, it doesn't always have to be a work application. I mean, even LinkedIn is technically a professional application, right? But orgs tend to focus their efforts first on sanctioned applications. But adversaries don't think that way, or they do, and they know that, right? adversaries are going to target individuals however they can get at them. And they're learning that attacking individuals via unsanctioned, non-sanctioned applications results in more success because the defenses don't always cover those alternate attack paths. Mobile, we're in a very strange gray area with mobile today because it's a huge attack surface. There are mobile security solutions out there, but the problem is user adoption, essentially. If they're not corporate-owned devices, it can be tough to get security solutions on some of these mobile devices. So that's something that the security industry is going to have to get figured out because we're kind of stuck in a gray area of vulnerability when it comes to BYOD and personal devices.
Absolutely. So just close out this, just another scam that we see. I don't know if everyone's aware. Sometimes when you go to Google, that fourth search term, the fifth search term is actually a scam. And one of the biggest areas for the support people in the room, again, a lot of times in your search for in your forums, the bad actors have embedded themselves. So almost a pseudo trust relationship that has been developed, and they're giving information and they try to get you to, again, do some form of compromise. So bottom line is, as I mentioned at the outset, the purpose of this was not certainly to scare, but rather to kind of educate and also look at it as an opportunity moving forward. So how do you protect yourself, right? How do you respond to what's going on in this ever-changing landscape? And, I think this is still fundamentally about people, process, and technology, and really making sure that really taking, I always like to say, number one, you really want to take a full assessment of where you currently are. What's your baseline, right? So fundamentally identify, is there an issue or not? And really, again, do this from the perspective of understanding where your users interact with all of your business tools as well as their personal tools. And is there any crossover interaction with that business life? So I think that's fundamentally important to start there. Second, how do you put in the right protection methods so you can prevent things not just in email, and email is a very important channel. And by the way, I should note, it's even within email. So as an example, again, I love Microsoft 365. We use it. ATP Defender is kind of the base level on top of that through E3, E5. We have shown a lot through third-party studies, about 65% of spear phishes that are embedded in these legitimate hosted infrastructure are getting through the very defenses that are even in Microsoft 365. So I would say that's not even good enough. You really want to make sure that in this technology approach on the protection side, that you're taking, are the tools using AI? Are they using behavioral analysis to really understand the kind of more defense in depth of what's going on in that attack? Do they have the ability to look beyond encryption? If you think about the evolution, what's going on in the browser, right? The browser is kind of that new window to the world, and that's where you're interfacing with all these different communication channels. There was also TLS 1.3, end-to-end encryption, and/or these other applications have their own encryption built into it. So how do you get beyond that encryption? So because the bad actors want to be visible at that point of intersection with the user, can your technology do the same thing to effectively provide that protection? And then finally, as I noted, you really want to make sure you're protecting across those channels. So Richard, you highlighted mobile, a very big attack vector, right? Communication vehicle that everyone's using on a day-to-day basis. The browser, it came out of the proxy world. We used to solve the encryption technique by breaking the tunnel, re-encrypt. Well, we can't do that on these personal communication channels, right? Clearly that we don't have a gateway we can plug into. So how do you sit effectively on that browser, see what's going on? And then finally, clearly email. You still want to look at some additional defenses you want to do there. Now, thing, as I like to say, for the Forrest Gump fans, as you can probably tell, I'm a big movie fan. Remember the bumper the sticker that says "shit happens"? Well, yes, it does have the no security defense is infallible. So how do you detect things that have gotten through? And then ultimately, how do you respond? So it may be that first user, right? How do you then detect it? Because you want continual probing of what's going on in your environment, and then be able to respond to that so you can clean it out of everyone else. In many respects, I would also I think everyone out there is probably doing more of this, again, defense in depth approach, where you have email security, you got endpoint security, you've got, some people are evolving using SIMs and certainly Sowers. I think you want to use all the above. And then how do you plug and almost do cross interaction at the API level with the threat? So you can not only detect if something happens here, I can respond to something over here. And then ultimately, how do you recover and ultimately prepare for that next attack, right? I think is fundamentally the approach that we like to advocate. And again, I think any good approach is about people, process, and yes, technology that really, how do you solve for these new threats?
No, that's exactly right, Patrick. I mean, as with almost anything in the security industry, you really need a program to solve for these problems, right? It's not a silver bullet to solve these things. For this issue, you need security awareness training, you need written policies, you need procedures for your staff to be following. You need trained staff that is trained up on the tools that they're supposed to be utilizing in the environments that they're going to be working in, and the technical controls, right? You need to understand what you should be looking for. Understand what to do when you detect something, understand how to respond or how to recover in the event that something gets through one of your tools, or we all know nothing is foolproof here. So it's about a lot more than just a single a technology control. It's about the program that backs that up, and that's equally important, if not as important or more important than the tool itself. Because if you've got the tool, but if you don't properly know how to operationalize it, you're not going to get the value out of it that you're expecting. It's not going to solve the problem that you were hoping for it to solve.
Yeah, exactly, Richard. And again, I know when we were kind of preparing for this, we were really going, we were going back and forth a little bit about this, the legacy and the new normal. And we talked about this at the outset. And I do think it's important for everyone to really make sure, take that view of that inventory of what you did to protect in the legacy and what you're doing to protect now in the new normal. And recognize, and again, this isn't about the being the scary boogeyman, but it is that user that you have to first and foremost bring front and center. How do I protect that user and the infallible nature of that user? Because that is that new perimeter. As we've seen this dramatic shift from on-prem inside the firewall to, again, that users everywhere. Everything's about SaaS interaction and remote. And I think this is the new normal. To your point, Richard, this is it'll be a new normal on steroids as we go forward.
Yep.
Desktops and laptops, right? We were always in the, hey, let's protect the OS. Well, guess what? Browsers are how you interact with almost everything now, right? So what are you doing to protect the browser? And you think about it, that's where the interactions really happen. And it's really about that user interaction at that point, not necessarily the machines. And then we talked about mobility, and mobility is everywhere. We're constantly on our mobile phone and our laptop, the iPads, et cetera. So that is very much front and center in this world of, you have to think about how you move from the kind of the signature-based approach to behavioral analysis and using AI to really fight, as I highlighted, machines with machines. This is a fundamental shift because I not just here, but in anywhere, if you're not able to apply AI because of the bad actors are doing it. And I think it's fundamentally important to be able to do that. One other piece, and because we, in the industry, we really talked about almost 0 day was this new panacea. I'm here to tell you that this is really about 0 hour with these type of attacks. Because they're able to automate and spawn so fast, and they're so cost effective. I mean, it's so low cost to do this that I now spawn these on a 0 hour. It's really you better be able to catch this almost in real time, because it only takes that one interaction in that browser to install that browser extension to do X, right? Or that HTML attachment that resolves local to your machine. And by the way, that's going to get beyond any of the defenses you already have, because it's sitting in that browser canvas. It's not something that's necessarily protected. Whether you maybe look at the malware side of that, but what about this human interaction piece? How do you look beyond just email to now multi-channel? I guess if Richard and I have gotten across nothing else here, this is a multi-channel communications world, collaboration world. I'm going to use any number of business apps as well as personal apps together at the same time, almost within the same 5 minutes or same hour within my work life. And so how are you protecting yourself there? And finally, I would say, how are you moving more from a reactive respond approach to more proactive, preemptive, proactive approach? And Richard, I know when we were going through this, there was And again, going back to the David Letterman, I mentioned the stupid human tricks. I put myself squarely in the stupid human side of this for a moment, but how do we, you remember that the top 10 list? I know there's some things you wanted to discuss here.
Yeah, no, I love that we're sticking to the theme. We wanted to provide you guys with some ammunition to take back to your organizations to help understand, what do the threat modelings look like at your organization? What do the controls look like at your organization? What does the coverage of those controls look like at your organization? And what does the program look like, right? What are the policies, the procedures, the staff training, the security awareness related to communications protections? Are you guys covering mobile? Are you guys, have the same phishing protections from an email perspective that you do across all of these other applications that people are using every single day? So, take a look at these questions. They're talking about different devices that you guys are supporting. Are you looking at, automating offending emails and other phishing attempts? But take this back to your organizations and try to use it to do some self-examination. Understand, again, the kind of the overall theme of this session, which is rethink your previously made assumptions, rethink the solutions that you've already put in place today, because the problem statement has changed. And these questions may help you identify where the delta is between where the problem is today versus where the solutions to solve that problem is today, when it was likely implemented to solve a problem of the past.
Yeah, perfect, Richard. And I would close with this. And Richard, were we going to open it up for any questions? Obviously, I assume any time. But
yeah, I think it's one question, but go ahead.
Yeah, perfect. So, here at SlashNext, we're obviously laser focused on stopping, again, what we call obviously phishing, but these human threats. And what I mean by human threats are, again, social engineering, scams, these rogue browser extensions, anything that can interact with that human or your users to get them to partake with their account information, get them to download some software, get them to really start that first level of that chain that leads to ransomware, to data theft and financial fraud. So we've developed a kind of a defense in depth approach. It's what we call our 360 multi-channel user protection. And really what we mean by that is we show here at the center is the user, and how do we provide that full 360-degree protection in email. We have the ability to plug directly into Microsoft 365 Graph API. It takes a couple minutes. It's very secure. And through that, on average, we are seeing between 40 to 70% at the high side, a detection of threats that are never found by other tools. And that really goes down to the depth of what we use: deep AI, behavioral analysis. My team, actually, the founder, actually created that malware sandbox at FireEye, and kind of left. And really, how do you preside? We use virtual browsers in the cloud. We will detect anywhere between 25 to 50,000 new 0-hour attacks daily. Just to give you a comparative, that's about 4 to 6x greater than Google safe browsing. So we find a lot of stuff, but we also use a second level of detection in the device, or actually in the email itself, which we do basically real-time scanning of the email. We also, again, provide that browser protection. This is to really get, if you think about that interaction from a user standpoint, I'm not only interacting with the box, the drop boxes, the Teams, the Zooms, but I'm also interacting with Signal and Telegram and WhatsApp through that browser. It's a browser extension that plugs right into any popular browser, deployed at scale. And by being directly in that canvas, we see exactly what that user sees. There's also AI in that browser that gives the ability to do a lightweight detection. If it's not in the database, we do lightweight detection, and we'll say, hey, this is a threat or not. A couple other advantages to also being in that browser. I can respect the heck out of privacy. We did talk about BYOD. One of the key things you want to have in BYOD is basically guaranteed privacy for that user. You're not tracking their browser behavior. And that leads to the final point, I would say, on the browser front. It's not a proxy service. It's not proxying something back and then bringing a result. You want to have great user experience. This has been a little bit of a downside for browser isolation technology. So by being there, you have the ability to see across all these channels of communication and stop the threats. A couple of just final points. That user protection also includes mobile protection for iOS and Android. So not only in any app that has a link, the ability to detect, block those threats, but also takes it one step further for SMS. I kind of hit over that 800 scam, right? Call your IT department or call the IRS, where we have the natural language processing engine that runs directly on those messages and can detect the intent and push those into, much like an email, it pushes into your spam box. And then finally, in the API, we integrate with all the kind of popular tools out there, not only to kind of respond to things, automated abuse inbox, brand protection, but also more and more, we're just seeing the API used to embed in other services, so we can provide that user protection through other means. So that's what we do at SlashNext, and it's really meant to, again, take it to that next level for full multi-channel protection. Because as we've said throughout this presentation, it's not just email, it's everything. And it's not just, again, old signature-based approach, but more of this AI behavioral analysis approach that we've combined together to be very effective for that user.
Now that's perfect, Patrick. Thank you so much for the time today. This was a very informative and engaging session. We really appreciate your time. And anyone who's been listening to the attendees, we would love to continue this conversation. To chat with you, please reach out to your EVOTEK representative. We'd love to help talk through how the problems have changed within your organization and reevaluate the solutions that you have in place to solve them. Thank you again, Patrick, and everyone else.
Yeah. Thank you.